Hey everyone, Professor Steele here with another video presented by Razer. Today I want to talk about win conditions, what are win conditions, how to understand your win condition, and when to think about win conditions. A win condition can be an overall strategy or a series of steps that you should take in order to win a round or the game. In other words, ask yourselves, how am I going to win this round, or how am I going to win this game? To boil this down into noob terms though, it determines if you should play fast versus slow, if you should have a lurker, or if you should just straight up 5-man hit, and more. It determines which parts of the map you should put more resources into, and which positions you can ignore. Let's start with the super simple, easy to understand stuff first. Let's look at how this Viper ulti on Icebox. If you are able to get into this position to cast this ultimate and plant the spike, you basically automatically win the round. For T1, their condition on the round was the Viper ulti. Everything that T1 did up until that point was to ensure that the Viper was able to get into the kitchen and deploy the Viper ulti. This means that other players need to go first to clear the position, protect the Viper. Viper is the VIP. She must be protected at all costs. You ever play a Sage and you beg your teammates to go first because you have Res? Res can be a win condition. Any ulti, okay, maybe besides Cypher ulti, can be a win condition. Raise rocket to entry, Brim ulti for a post plant, Astral wall for a retake, etc. These are all micro win conditions that you should consider on a round-to-round basis. But what about macro, the overall win condition and strategy? Think about playing Icebox and your teammates don't pick Sage. How does that limit you? Obviously, the Sage wall is strong to help plant the spike on either site, especially B site. If you were to go to B site without a Sage, the poor soul planting the spike will surely get destroyed every time if you try to do everything the same way you would do without a Sage. Instead, you need to play it differently. With Sage, you can use the ice wall and plant behind it. Without a Sage wall, you need to alleviate the pressure so the planter doesn't get spammed by gunfire and abilities. There are different ways to achieve this. Perhaps you use a KO knife. Maybe you dump your own abilities on where the defenders would play. Or you could underhand a flash through the Viper wall and push the defenders. Maybe combining these things with a flank from mid. Compare these two examples. The players are all defending on Ascent, but their agent composition has changed. In the first example, let's call them Team X, you have an Astra defending towards A, a Sage nearby to defend Cat and support Astra at A, a Fade and Raze combo towards B site, and a Chamber that is starting around middle, ready to move in either direction. If the enemy tries to do anything towards B, they have to get through a Boombot, a Raze Grenade, Fade Tether, Astra Gravity Well, Smokes, potential sack to utility combos. If the enemy tries to come out A quickly, the defenders can place a Wall Cat, focus completely on the choke point A main. They can use an Astra Smoke, a Gravity Well, stagger 2 slows, which buys time for rotation. If the enemies try to go fast into this composition, they're going to have a bad time. Contrast this to the next example. Let's call them Team Y. You have players in relatively the same starting positions, but now we've changed the agents that are on the map. Instead of Astra, you have Brim. His smokes last longer, but have a limited range. He can stall A main for a little while with his Molly, but his only backup is Reyna. Reyna doesn't have good stall abilities. Brim can't get any help from anyone, nor can he really help his teammates on B. His teammates on B are a Sova that has a dart for spam kills, and a Jet. Their closest teammate is the Chamber to run through to help from market, but won't have a smoke at B main because the Brim is across the map. This composition will have a much more difficult job defending against a 5-man fast play, as they lack the stalling utility, and therefore playing this passive will not yield good results. So when we reframe this a bit, we can say the win condition for Team Y is to actively take fights and steal ground and map control before their opponents are able to execute. We can also say that the win condition for Team X is for the enemy to run into their traps. If these two teams were to go head-to-head, Team Y would want to have lurks and defaults on attack and not try to end the round in the first minute. On defense, they would need to take gambles on where to stack or where to fight with lots of numbers. Meanwhile, Team X comp would want to avoid isolated duels on attack in favor of grouped hits, and on defense they would want to hold their spread out setup while making minor changes with positionings or ability use, so moving where the Sage slow or wall goes, for example. When you load into a game, the very first thing you should do is consider the map, your comp, and your opponent's comp. You have to think about how the maps work and what the strengths and weaknesses of your comp and the enemy comp are, to think about how you want to approach playing that map in that setting instead of autopiloting to play in the same way as always. To think about what the enemy will focus on and need for them to execute their win conditions. Here are 2 rounds from Cloud9 versus the Guard, back in Stage 1 Challengers. Both teams ran very similar Haven comps, which were brand new at the time, and set the meta for Haven for months. The guard really played into the strengths of their comp by playing as a wrecking ball on both sides. On defense, this means that they never spread themselves thin by trying to hold every position. They focused on holding one position very strong and were comfortable having to give up another area. Leveraging the Jet with the op to pick off the lazy players and Chamber to be a human drone ready to reposition at a moment's notice, they moved around as a pack, ready to pounce on their opponents before their opponents got comfy. In this round, we watch how the guard starts off with a strong A defense, effectively giving up all of C and B sites. As Cloud9 tries to move into A site, they lose a player, and the guard is able to hold strong. Cloud9 cuts noise and rotates back around to middle, and destroys one of the guard's alarm bots. Take note of how the guard move around together. They leave the Jet with her op towards A, ready to get out of the site, and the rest of the players are positioned between A and B sites, ready to act in either direction. They have the advantage already. They do not need to try to protect the sites and lose a life or two, and it'll tip the advantage back over to Cloud9. As Cloud9 is finally able to get into the A site and plant the spike, the guard's retake comes into full swing, with flashes from Skye and Breach, a fault line, Skye ultimate, the works. They also had in their back pocket an Omen flash for good measure. There's nothing Cloud9 can do besides plan for the next round. Contrast this to this next round. The guard is on attack, on the pistol round, and moves together again as a wrecking ball. They flipped a coin and decided to attack the C site. If Cloud9 played the map like the guard, they would have had either played with numbers to defend C site together, or they would have played for info on C and then abandoned the site to wait for reinforcements. Take notice of the minimap and look at the reinforcements for C site. Here we can see the guard fully sending it, and Cloud9 loses Vanity first on the site as he is overwhelmed with Mitch, to follow shortly after. These first kills happen, and the A rotations are still sprinting for their lives through defender spawn, but would still need another 10 seconds minimum to arrive at the entrance to the defender's part of C site. Had Vanity and Mitch ran away to live, Cloud9 could have had a chance at retaking the round in a 5 versus 5, because they would have had all of their abilities ready to use, whereas the guard already depleted most of their abilities just by taking the site. To wrap things up, you should always keep in mind what your win condition is and play around that. It can be using an op versus teams that don't have initiators. It can be working around an op that was saved from the round before instead of having everyone run in and die with classics because we're on eco. Every comp has a win condition, no matter how terrible the comp was. Running Phoenix after 2020, make sure you grab the ulti orb so that you can spam his ulti 4 times and a half. I hope this video helps, and if it does, remember to like, follow, subscribe, and all the other fun stuff.